So Motio is a great opportunity for you, especially when you're doing upgrades. But, you know, I'm going to focus there primarily for this upcoming section. But I do want to draw your attention to the fact that Motio is a lot more than just upgrades, right? Motio can handle the details of your administrative workload so that you can focus on the bigger picture, you know, in terms of the rest of your job, which I'm sure is going to be a lot more than worrying about security, worrying about old content in your database, you know, keeping an eye on the things that really matter. So that's sort of why I say focus on the big picture. Let's let Motio handle those details. So there's two facts that we can all hopefully agree on. One, we all have zombie content in our content stores, right? You've got those reports that maybe you haven't run a consistency check recently, and there's a bunch of, you know, old my content sitting around taking up space, reports that people wrote 4 or 5 years ago that no one has run in years. So that kind of zombie content is sitting there sort of waiting to jump out at us and chomp on our reports. So that's the first fact. We've all got it. There's no shame to it. The second is we're all data-driven people, right? If you're listening to this conversation, you are someone who data is, if not your life, it's definitely your livelihood, right? So why would we not take a data-driven approach to managing our application, right? Cognos, if it, you know, I joke, I said Cognos has paid my mortgage for close to 20 years, and it may be paying many of yours. So let's love our application and take that data-driven approach that we would apply to our own data and apply it to the management of that application that pays the mortgage. So we know our content stores and our audit stores are wildly complex, right? I don't like to peer behind that curtain very often because you look at it and you see all these, you know, GUI IDs and crazy strings of characters that, you know, at first glance don't make a whole lot of sense to me. You do have the ability to sort of query and get in here, but it's sort of like hacking through a rainforest with a machete. So Motio has hacked through that rainforest for us, right? It helps make sense of this crazy complex content and audit store and brings the key stuff. You know, you think about here the signal amidst the noise. It brings that signal forward to the surface so that we can, like I said, concentrate on the things that matter and don't worry about hacking through that forest of the content store or the audit store. So what are some of the tools? MotioCI and PI are probably the most familiar to us. Some of us probably own it already. MotioCI is that version control, automated deployment and testing capability, right? You run those test cases and you see your cloudy skies or your sunny skies. MotioPI, the non-pro version, is the one that you can download and it gives you some of the functionality of MotioPI. But where the real action's at is MotioPI Pro, where you've got that ability to not only document the environment security schedules, but you can also interact, make mass updates, validation of changes, etc. The mass update example is a great one because I'll bet you a lot of us have things like image paths in our reports. I have, you know, in a former life, I had an image, everyone had used hard-coded images on their reports. And we ended up having to keep our Cognos gateway, our old Cognos gateway, alive for years after we had moved on to a new version of Cognos just to serve those images because no one wanted to go back through 10,000 reports and update the company logo that happened to have been hard-coded. I'm sure many of you are smart and have dynamic links, but if you're in that kind of a boat, mass updates like that are no-brainers with MotioPI Pro. They also have the report card that does monitoring and stress testing and also report and package assessments, let you know how you're doing, sort of like the, you know, the package analyzer there on steroids. And the one that we're going to talk most about here with the time that I have is the inventory and reduction tool. Because I am sort of pitching this from the perspective of the upgrade, inventory and reduction is your main tool into identifying that unused or little used content, grouping content into high, medium, and low complexity reports, and then allowing you to reduce that off the content store in a way that if you realize after the fact you've made a mistake, you can come back from and bring it back, right? One of the things I always tell people is, there's no great recycle bin in Cognos, right? You delete something, sometimes you're in trouble. With the Motio tools, not only can you bring things back, you can also do them in groups, like with this reduction. One of the questions that often gets asked before we move into inventory reduction is, so what comes with that 30-day trial we hear about that comes with the IBM upgrade? And just to shoot that one out right now, it's MotioCI, right? The version control, automated deployment, and testing, and it is for a sandbox environment, right? So it's MotioCI installed on a sandbox. It is not MotioCI installed necessarily on your production server, okay? So if you want to go beyond CI on the sandbox, including into inventory reduction, we're going to discuss about some options for acquiring the software license. They're very, very nicely priced and not generally difficult to put together. So inventory and reduction. So what it's going to do for us is identify those good candidates for removal, identify the priority reports to help us know what we need to look at for testing purposes. And as I said, I can only think of the movie, but I hear the purge noise. We're going to purge and have the ability to restore, which that's one thing the purge movies don't have, the ability to restore content. So let's look at that selected functionality over there. Inventory your objects, take a look at broken links, which packages are used, which packages aren't used. You might actually have packages that aren't being used at all anymore. Listing your content store, deleting those unused or old reports, and some user statistics. It actually, inventory reduction gives you some information about what your users are doing as well. So what does it look like? First of all, we have when you put inventory reduction together, it becomes some additional tabs in a CI environment. You see the inventory tab and the reduction tab. You configure it to point to your content store and your audit store, so it can sort of keep its foot in both ponds, as it were. So you're sort of merging information in a way that's tricky to do. Hey, you could maybe use a data set or a data module to do that, but again, let's let Motio do it for us, right? So it becomes part of the web portal for Motio. What does it feel like? Well, you create a job, and that job runs at whatever schedule you want it to. So for instance, you see here this inventory range. The audit date range is February 19 to August 19. It tells you how many packages, how many reports, unreferenced packages, duplicate artifacts there. And then the most important thing here is the download button, because you're going to download that inventory archive. Because while this information is great, it's just the tip of the iceberg for what you're really going to be using. So when you download that archive, you'll see it's actually a big old zip file that has a bunch of spreadsheets in it. The spreadsheets, you can see content by package, object counts, report stats, user login stats. There's a lot of information. And what's great about it is by serving it up in Excel, it's incredibly portable too, right? It's offline. You don't need to, if you want to review this with people, you can send it out. It's available, in a way that's very consumable. You could, sit on an airplane and then look at your unreferenced packages. The inventory workbook is the primary, I'll say, the table of contents for this, right? So you open it up and you see there's a literal table of contents, which has, duplicate names, not run recently, recently used, etc. The simple, moderate, complex, which is really helpful. Reports that use native queries. So let's call those guys out. Reports that have HTML items in them, absolutely important to know. And then this filters tab, which allows us to change some of the definitions, right? So you might already have asked, hey, how do I define what's recent versus not recent, right? To some people, recent could be 30 days. To others, it could be 3 years. So you do have the ability to go to this filter changing spot within this massive interwoven spreadsheet and change some of these settings. So for instance, you can see, the ability to set the minimum number of executions to be considered recent, right? You can see the ability to define how many queries makes a simple report versus a moderate report, right? Some of these actually, to say that a simple report is 5 queries, you might go, to me, a simple report's 1 query. So you can come in here and you can change this and then refresh the data, and it'll redraw all of the spreadsheets for you against those parameters rather than what was generated for you. So you don't have to go back in and rerun the inventory. You can update it right here in Excel. So here's some example output, right? We've got the not run recently. In this case, it's 365 days was the definition of recent, but as you know, that's definable. And we have here you see the display name. You do see the path is available as well as the type. What was the query mode? And there's a lot more columns here that I couldn't even show on the screenshot. For instance, what are some of these columns? How many queries are there? How many filters? Are there specific security policies on this report? How many containers, data containers, list reports, visualizations? How many things are on the pages of that report? Who's the owner? Is it currently the victim of parsing errors? Is it a burst report, right? And you can see over here in the green, there's a lot more than what I just called out. Some very interesting data that you've got right there about all of your reports. So using these, you can then prioritize, right? So it's not just about getting rid of old reports that no one's run in a while. It can also be from the other use case, which is, gosh, what do I really need to look at, right? If I'm doing an upgrade, I want to look at my SQL reports. I want to look at my HTML item reports. I'm sure a lot of us have been burned by JavaScript not working, after an upgrade, right? You want to look at these reports specifically and make sure that they're at the top of the list for testing. So then, once we identify these things, you can begin your reduction, right? So you select and reduce your reports. It'll tell you what reports have been reduced and the number of objects reduced. Now you might say, wait a second, compensation report there, it says objects reduced 3, but that looks like a single report. Well, one of the great things that's involved here with this tool is smart reduction, which says if it cleans up a report, it's also going to clean up all of the things that are hung off of that report, such as all these report views, right? So actual versus planned was reduced because I asked for it to be reduced based on the feedback, but it also went out and cleaned out the report views attached to it as the reason you can see here, reduction cascade, right? Because if I remove the main report, obviously those views are going to be orphaned, and we don't want them out there to lure people in, okay? So that smart reduction is another great feature here of inventory and reduction. So now it's a few days later, and I get a phone call from somebody, and they say, "Oh, hey, wait a second. This is my report that I run once every 2 years." I said, "Okay, interesting choice for a report, but it's my report that I run once every 2 years. I need to get it back." Well, you can go back in and look at the revision history of what you've cleaned up, and you can see what was cleaned up. You can see what was deleted. You can see all the information you need, and you can bring it back. Okay, so you can undo a reduction. For instance, we come back and we say, I need returns by product type back. You see on that list in the reduction details report, there's an undo action on the right side that allows me to bring it back into my environment. So, consider that kind of the really nice safety net on this, right? If we went through our content store before an upgrade and cleaned it up, which is a great thing to do regardless, but this is smart, right? And if I just deleted a bunch of things, I'm not going to get them back very easily. I mean, I guess I could take a content backup and stand up a server on the side. And move, no, this is nice, automated, all in this one product that lets you bring things back from the dead, which then brings me back to my initial zombie concept, right? So, what are some tips for success? Number one, be aggressive. Be aggressive. Or as John Malkovich would say in Rounders, aggressive. Be aggressive because you can recover things. You can get these back. So, when you're cleaning up before an upgrade, I mean, there are stats here saying you can save yourself lots and lots of money and time by cleaning things up in advance that you're not going to be chasing ghosts once you start doing your testing, right? You don't want to spend time fixing a report that no one uses. So be aggressive because you can recover things. Also, make sure to clean up those dependent objects, right? Go in there, it's going to clean things up. You're going to make sure all your views and all your schedules and all those things are cleaned up. But also, don't take it on all yourself, right? Use Motio, use your fellow analysts and your fellow Cognos, Cognots, if you will, and review these things together and make decisions that are going to be successful in the long run. So don't forget to be aggressive, but also don't forget to share and work together. All right, I appreciate the time. I hope you see that that's kind of a really neat little tool, and it could be worth a lot of our time.